Hello students, this is Dr. Miller. This is assignment 5 feedback. I think we made some improvement in this last episode here. Your photos showed some good abilities. Some of them missed the mark, but let's take a look and see what you got. One of the things, this is a great quote from a guy named Matt Coker, and he's a Canadian photographer. And this is the truth about photos, as he says. And the truth is that good photos are pretty rare. So when you're beginning, you won't have a lot of really good photos. And when you do get one, you're not even sure how you did it. What you want to do, as he suggests, is to just keep shooting, keep learning, keep understanding, getting to know your equipment, and really looking not just at what you're shooting, but what others are shooting as well. You will make progress. You are making progress. The biggest problem I have with the students in this class is that some of them just simply don't turn in the work. And if you don't turn in the work, you can't be successful. So what we were going to do on this was an assignment that focused on landscapes. And landscapes are essentially a scenery of some form. What I asked was you apply the rule of thirds, that you take a couple of photographs that have a dominant object in the foreground but are still landscapes. And then I wanted you to show me that you could use lines or a line as a factor in creating your photographs. And then I wanted you to do 3 photographs that were more scenic and 3 photographs that were more urban in their environment. Obviously, some of you must live in pretty rural areas, so part of the challenge, I guess, was that you needed to go to an urban environment, because I had a number of photos that were submitted that just frankly were not anywhere near being urban environment. So you were going to submit a total of 13 photographs. And it's pretty simple. If you counted them up and you didn't have 13 photographs in these different categories, then that's a problem. So let's go ahead and look at some of them we've got. All right, scenery, the natural scenic kind of stuff should be really pretty easy, because everybody has access to a landscape that's going to be good looking, you know. So it's really a question of when you go, what you're trying to accomplish, and what you can see. So this is Danielle has a beautiful sunset here. The only kind of issue I have, and this is a pet peeve of mine, but I don't like to see power lines in here. And they're not really super annoying here, so it's not too much of an issue. But if you're taking scenery and you want it to be really beautiful, you don't want to have power poles and power lines and trash cans and things like that in there. So sometimes that means you have to move around a little bit. Sometimes it means you just have to take what's there. And particularly with the lighting like this, and I'm sure Danielle was excited to see this beautiful light out here and wanted to take the picture. So that's probably the good choice to do. I mean, if you don't have the time to hike on the other side and find a great image in the foreground, part of what makes this good is this foreground image here. That's understandable. Let's see, this is Mona. And this is just kind of a classic stream shot. I like it. I didn't ask, to freeze the water or make the water gauzy or anything. This is a little bit in between, but it's very nice. Also, you see how this kind of area where the water's spilling over, this is approximately 1/3 of the way up in the image from the bottom to the top. So that is applying a line of thirds principle to this photograph. It's one of the reasons it works. This is Trevor, and there are a lot of people that submitted photographs of trees. What makes this an interesting photograph are a couple of things. One, the light. This is probably taken in the early morning or late afternoon, and you can see by the shadows here. And that makes it a little more interesting because you get more side light where the objects are being lit on the side where the light is, and it's dark on the other side. I also like the contrast between these bare trees and then these trees that are beginning to flower out here on this side. And then this pathway is kind of nice. And basically this is also one that I think uses both a line kind of thing, although it's a kind of an implied line, and also I think it's somewhat true to the rule of thirds in the sense that if you look at this area right over here is sort of what catches your eye, because that's the intersection of the thirds. This one works nicely. This is another one from Mona, and this is I mean, you don't have to take a landscape photo entirely on the land. You can consider clouds a landscape. What I like about this is she kept just enough of these trees down here to give it some perspective. If you didn't have this, you wouldn't know, what direction it was or anything else. This is kind of a placeholder and helps you. Also, the light is really nice, and obviously when you're shooting into the sun, it's definitely tricky. So the sun is somewhat obscured by this cloud here, and that kind of makes it. Also, if you look at this light that's coming down here, and really what this is the light is picking up dust and other minute material that's in the air and highlighting it. When I was a kid and I used to see light like this, I used to think there was a miracle happening somewhere because that's sort of the effect that it has. So that's a nice shot there. On the urban images, again, some of you had struggled a little bit because you didn't get very urban, but this is a pretty good one here from McKenna, who shot this building on the side and then looking out here. So this is pretty good in terms of getting the horizon out here on this third line and then this building here. So it's pretty faithful to the rule of thirds, and I think that's part of why this is a strong image. The lines that are here work nicely as well. This is another one from Mona, and this is interesting, and part of it is because there's this kind of mystery as to what is this or what happened. There's stairways to nowhere. I think this is interesting because of this rock wall here and these rocks. The one thing that kind of diminishes this a little bit is this real estate sign, I think that is back here. But when we get into video editing, there's something we can do. We can get rid of it. So there's the sign, and now it's gone. And that's real easy to do in most of the editing software that we have available to us. This is Danielle, and this is really not what I would consider an urban environment, but it's a good effort, and it's not necessarily the fault of students who, for what reason, couldn't get out to the proper environment. At least in Danielle's case, she made an interesting photograph, and part of this is interesting because of this line. You remember when these two sides of the road start to get out here. It's vanishes back here. That's called the convergent point or the vanishing point. I think the cracks in the road looks like it had rained sometime. There's a lot of interesting kind of detail in here. This stuff back here isn't really anything great, but it's not a hindrance here because it's pretty far back. So this is nice and good effort here. This is Emma's, and I thought this was the best of the urban images. And what makes it interesting is twofold. Number one, she took the right angle on the building, which is a corner. Because it is a corner, it's just more interesting. If it was just straight on from over on this side, I don't think it would be as good as it is. The other thing that makes it really nice is, again, it's light. This is probably later in the afternoon, possibly earlier in the morning, but see these shadows here, and the shadow actually on the building. All this adds a lot of depth. You see all this kind of distressed area on the wall over here, and the actual place where the paint's kind of away from the bricks and all that. That you wouldn't see that kind of detail if it was taken at noon and you didn't have the shadows. So this is a nice nice image. Ideally, you wouldn't want to have that traffic sign, parking sign, whatever that is, but it's not that big a deal. Now let's talk a little bit more about the rule of thirds, okay? What you do is you divide the image up into thirds from bottom to top and thirds from left to right. A lot of the cameras that you have will have a grid that will have this 9x9 array built into it, so you can turn that on. And what you want to do is you want to have the intersection of this third line and this third line. Remember, we got these ones over here that I didn't draw in, and that is kind of where your eye will gravitate towards, and that's what makes the image powerful. So horizontally speaking, this is good on the thirds, and probably ideally if maybe this had come out a little more to the left to be slightly in here, but that's being awful picky. This is a pretty good shot. And then here's a rule of thirds example again from Mona, where the road going back here and the fence line stops short, but the kind of the field area sort of continues. So that's a pretty good effort here as well. This is a one I actually put this in the dominant object category because I didn't really have a lot of really good shots. This is one that you didn't quite grasp as well, and the idea is to have something in the foreground just to make it more interesting. So if that round bale of hay wasn't here, this would not be quite as interesting. Part of why this is interesting is because of the scale that it adds. We generally know the size of this hay bale, and so that can kind of give us some idea of the space. And then it's not perfectly on the line of thirds, but rule of thirds, but that's okay. But this is a good example. This is a landscape. There's the scenery back here, but there's something that sort of anchors this photograph. This is Trevor's dominant object, and this kind of goofy looking flamingo sculpture is the object in the foreground. To me, the composition on this isn't quite right, but it is a good example of putting something in the foreground just to make this a little bit more interesting in terms of a landscape. I took the liberty of taking this image and putting a grid on it. So if we were to shoot this and apply that rule of thirds, you can see if we had this set up where the head of the bird is at this intersection right here, then it really makes it a little more interesting. And particularly because this is sort of a curve, and it's sort of like your eye starts here, but all this other stuff is nicely in place. And even this deck rail here kind of works. If we go back to the original image, you can see that a lot of this stuff over here isn't contributing a whole lot. So that would be a slightly better way of doing that shot. All right, dominant lines. This is an issue that some of you struggled with, and some of you actually had dominant lines that were good, but they weren't in the category. So here's Danielle, and there's some good lines from the two chicken houses that lead back. These feed bins back here, kind of lead your lead there by these lines. So that's kind of cool. The fact that it's right here, this horizon is right here, isn't bad, but just to give you an idea, if you had recomposed the photograph and put this horizon line on the rule of thirds here, it would change it up. I'm not saying it's necessarily a much better photo, but there's a lot of this stuff that doesn't really lend itself to any value. So I think this might be a better way to approach it. Now, one thing that a number of you did is when you have the horizon out here, keep it level. Don't tilt your camera. It's really annoying, and it's very amateurish to have tilted horizon lines out here. So just keep it, whatever the bottom is here, try to keep the horizon out there. Vertical is the same way as the horizontal, so that it's parallel to the bottom of your frame. There's that rule of thirds. Okay, this is Emma, and I thought this was a really great photo. Normally, I don't like light poles, and these are condensation trails that are made by jet aircraft. And what's going on here is when the jet flies, of course, the fuel is being burned in the engines, and it's releasing water vapor, which freezes, and it turns it into a cloud. And so you get these streaks from the engine of the airplane. Now, the fact that this light fixture is here, it kind of reminds me of like a brush or something that it had painted these on. But this actually, to me, is a really interesting photograph. This is another one with dominant lines. A couple of you had some decent ones with roads, and this is the only one that had a railroad track. Just to show you a slight issue with it, if you had the lines kind of more winding up at this point, at the line of thirds point, rather than running off the frame to the left here, maybe that would have been a slightly better photograph, but it's not bad. Definitely, again, because I think of the time of day, there's some definition here with some shadowing that makes the texture of the railroad ties kind of interesting. All right, so that's some of the shots that were submitted that I thought would be worthy of sharing. Now, there were a lot of shots that I don't share. If you turn in just an average or below average photo, I don't really want to put it in these feedback videos because it's not my point to kind of humiliate you or anything like that. So I try to use good examples, not bad examples. But if you're not seeing your work in these feedback things, you're missing something on the directions, or you're just not taking enough time. Still, I have some students that seem to be shooting almost everything from their porch or their front yard or their backyard. And you really need to get out and do more. On this next assignment, assignment 6, it's about portraits and it's about lighting. Portraits are, in this class, primarily going to be people. You may submit a pet photo as a portrait. I just don't want a whole bunch of that. I want people, and I want faces in particular. So there's some really interesting articles and videos about portraits, and some of them contain information about lighting, because lighting in the portrait setting is really crucial. And there's different ways to use natural light, and there's a couple of videos. There's one that's really kind of the longest video in the course, and it's about studio portrait photography using studio lighting. It's a simple lighting setup, but I think you need to know, what does a professional photographer do to get a portrait? Now, you're not professional photographers, not yet, but you can learn from people by watching what they do and seeing if you can figure out how to apply some of that to what you're doing. Even if you're using an iPhone and they've got some giant camera that costs thousands of dollars, it doesn't necessarily make a better portrait. You can do really, really great portraits with any of the cameras that the students in this class have. It's about seeing what you're doing, paying attention to your lighting, to your equipment, to your focus, and working with your subject. Remember, a portrait is a person who knows that you are taking their photo. They're part of the process. So some of the articles and videos, they actually relate to how you, as a photographer, will work with your model. All right, next week is spring break. We're not going to stop work on the course. And in fact, it's a great opportunity for those of you, even if you're just not going to class and you're staying around locally, you'll have more time. If you happen to be traveling, if you're going to the beach or someplace like that, that opens up all kinds of stuff. So what I want you to do, even though this isn't part of your assignment, hopefully you can do your portrait stuff at the beach if that's where you're at. But what I want you to think about is getting just more really good photographs. And don't worry about, is this a landscape or is this a urban, or don't worry about the terminology. Just worry about what's a good image. You have been exposed to a lot of really great photographs in this course by now through the material you're reading and the videos you're looking at. Pay attention to what makes a good photograph and get out there and get some images that you're going to be really proud of. And you can use any of the photos that you shoot during the course, any of them, for whether they're for this specific assignment of portraits or whether another assignment, or you just are taking them during the course. That's fine, because at the end you're going to have a portfolio of your best work that you will submit. They don't have to be things that you turned in for an assignment. If you're at the beach and you got a really great shot and we don't have an assignment that it fits in, you can use it for your portfolio. All right, I have changed the date on the writing assignment because I realized it is a little bit quick, and also with spring break, this is a great time for you to work on that assignment, go back and read the assignment instructions and watch the little video for that. And then hopefully you selected your photographer. You can do some work on that, and it'll be due a week after you get back from spring break. So we are going to be moving quickly through the rest of the assignments, and we need to stay on task. Some of you have turned in everything on time and are doing a fantastic job with getting the work done and doing a good job with what you're doing. And some of you just are falling behind. So get your work in. I do accept late work, even right up towards pretty close to the end of the course. I'll take your assignments that you haven't turned in. I will mark them down for being late, but at least you're getting some points and they can help you get a better grade. So if you have any questions, please contact me through the Blackboard messaging system. Good luck. Have a great spring break.